Amara stood in the courtyard of her family's compound, her bare feet touching the red earth that her grandfather had walked on decades ago. The morning sun was warm on her shoulders, and she could hear the sound of chickens clucking near the wooden fence. Behind her stood the old stone house with its corrugated iron roof, the same house where she had given birth to all three of her children, where she had nursed her mother back to health after her father died, and where countless memories lived in every corner. The compound was situated in the heart of rural Kenya, surrounded by rolling green hills that stretched as far as the eye could see. The land was fertile and beautiful, with banana plants and maize fields surrounding the main house. There was a small garden where Amara grew vegetables, tomatoes, cabbages, and beans, that she sold at the local market to earn money for her family. This was her world and she loved it deeply. It was not a rich world, but it was a world filled with love, security, and the warmth of family. Amara's mother, Mama Grace, was sitting on a wooden bench under the large acacia tree as she did every morning. She was now 72 years old, her back bent from years of hard work, her hands lined with age. But her eyes were still sharp and kind. She was knitting a sweater for little Kamau, Amara's youngest son. Nearby, Juma, who was 14, was helping his uncle repair the fence, while Zuri, 11 years old, was inside the house doing her schoolwork. Everything was peaceful and normal, just as it had been for the past 23 years. Kofi, Amara's husband, lived in Nairobi. He had moved to the city 15 years ago to start a business, leaving Amara to care for the children and the compound. He visited every month or sometimes every 2 months, bringing money and gifts, but mostly he was in the city building his life. Amara had accepted this arrangement long ago. She understood that a man needed to work and provide for his family, and Nairobi was where the opportunities were. Their marriage was not perfect, but it was stable. They had their routines and their understandings. That morning, Amara received a text message on her old phone. It was from Kofi. He said he was coming home today earlier than expected. He wanted to discuss something important with the whole family. The message made Amara feel uneasy. Kofi never came home unexpectedly. Something was wrong. She began preparing lunch, chopping vegetables with quick, nervous movements. She made ugali with sukuma wiki, a simple but nutritious meal that her family loved. She boiled water for tea. She arranged the sitting room, straightening the cushions on the old sofa that had been in their family for years. Her hands were busy, but her mind was anxious and racing. When Kofi's black car arrived at the compound in the early afternoon, Amara's heart began to beat faster. The children ran to greet their father, but he walked past them with barely a smile. He did not hug them or ask about their lives. He simply said, "Later. I need to talk to your mother first." His face was serious and cold in a way that Amara had never seen before. Mama Grace watched from under the acacia tree, her hands still holding the knitting needles. She whispered something to Juma and the boy's face grew worried. Kofi walked into the sitting room and sat down on the sofa. Amara followed him, her stomach tight with fear. She had been married to this man for 23 years. She knew his moods, his expressions, his habits. But the man sitting in front of her now felt like a stranger. "Amara," he said, and his voice was cold and businesslike as if he was speaking to someone he barely knew, "We need to sell this compound." For a moment, Amara thought she had not heard him correctly. She opened her mouth but no words came out. "The property value has increased a lot," Kofi continued, not looking at her face. "Real estate in this area has become valuable. We can make a lot of money from selling it. I have already spoken to a property dealer in Nairobi, and they have evaluated the land. The price is very good." "Sell?" Amara finally whispered. "Kofi, this is our home. This is where our children live. This is where my mother lives. My grandparents built this house. My father was born in this house. Where would we go?" Kofi still did not look at her. "You could rent a smaller house in the town nearby. The money from this sale would be enough for that and much more. I have other plans for this money, Amara." "Big plans." "What plans?" Amara asked, though she already felt afraid of the answer. "I have met a woman in the city," Kofi said finally, and now he looked at Amara directly. His eyes showed no guilt, no shame, no hesitation. "Her name is Victoria. She is a businesswoman with a lot of money and connections. We are planning to start a very big business together. This money from selling the compound will be my investment in our venture. Victoria believes we can make millions." The words hit Amara like a physical blow. Not only was her husband talking about destroying her family's home, but he was doing it for another woman. The room began to spin around her. "There is someone else?" Amara's voice came out very small and broken. "What did you expect?" Kofi said harshly. "I have been working in the city for 15 years. I have my own life there. You chose to stay here in this village with the children. I provided money, I provided support, but I also have my own needs, Amara. Victoria understands ambition. She understands business. She understands the modern world. You are content to grow vegetables and live like this is still 50 years ago. Amara felt tears beginning to form in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall in front of him. Our children, she said quietly. What about our children? The children will be fine, Kofi said coldly. I will send money for their school fees, their food, their needs. That is what a father does. But I cannot stay trapped in this old life, Amara. I cannot. Mama Grace appeared in the doorway. She had heard everything. Her old face was pale and her hands trembled. She did not say anything. She simply turned and walked away, back toward the acacia tree where her knitting lay forgotten. That night, no one in the compound slept. Amara lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the night, the insects, the wind in the trees, the occasional sound of an animal in the distance. In the next room, she could hear her children whispering to each other, confused and frightened. In another room, Mama Grace lay awake, her quiet sobs muffled by her pillow. Amara realized that her entire world, everything she had built and protected and loved, was about to disappear. And she had no idea how to stop it. Kofi left the compound early the next morning, his black car speeding away toward the city before most of the village was awake. He did not say goodbye to his children. He did not hug Amara. He simply left, leaving behind a family broken and afraid, and a wife whose mind was now burning with questions and determination. For 3 days, Amara could barely eat or sleep. She moved through her daily tasks like a ghost, feeding her children, caring for her mother, tending to the garden. But her mind was working hard, thinking, planning. She had been married to Kofi for 23 years. She knew that he was ambitious and sometimes careless with money, but she had never known him to be cruel. The coldness in his eyes, the way he had dismissed her and their family so easily, it did not feel right. Something deeper was happening, something darker than just a man wanting to leave his wife. On the 4th day, Amara made a decision. She had a copy of the key to Kofi's office in Nairobi. He had given it to her years ago when they first married, telling her she could always access his important documents if there was an emergency. She had never used it. She had trusted him completely. But trust, she now realized, could be a dangerous thing. She told her uncle that she was going to the city to visit a friend. She took a bus early in the morning, her heart beating fast the entire journey. The office was located in a busy part of Nairobi, on the 2nd floor of a building near the business district. It took her 2 hours to find the courage to use the key and enter. The office was small but expensive looking. There was a large desk, a computer, filing cabinets, and several framed photographs on the walls. Amara locked the door behind her and began to search. Her hands were shaking and she felt like a thief in her own husband's space, but she forced herself to continue. In the first filing cabinet she found folders labeled with dates and names. One folder caught her eye. It was labeled Property, Compound. With trembling fingers she opened it. What she saw made her knees weak. There were documents that looked official, bearing the seal of a bank. They were loan agreements and Amara's name was on them. But she had never signed any loan agreements. She had never borrowed money against the compound. Yet there was her signature, clear as day, on page after page. But it was not her signature. It was a forgery. Someone had copied her name and signature very carefully, but it was not real. Amara's heart began to race. This was not just infidelity or abandonment. This was crime. She continued searching, her fear growing with each document she found. There were more loan agreements, all forged with her name. The amounts were very large, hundreds of thousands of shillings. The compound was being used as collateral for loans that Kofi had taken out, loans that Amara knew nothing about. If he defaulted on these loans, the bank could take their home. But there was more. Deep in another filing cabinet, Amara found documents with a woman's name on them, Victoria Mwangi. There were business contracts, partnership agreements, and bank transfer receipts. And then, in a smaller folder, she found something that made her blood go cold. There were photographs. Victoria was a beautiful woman, dressed expensively, photographed in restaurants and hotels. But in many of the photographs, she was with a tall man in an expensive suit. Amara recognized him immediately from the television news. He was Senator David Mwangi, one of the most powerful politicians in Kenya. He was Victoria's husband. Amara's hands began to shake as she read through the documents more carefully. This was not a simple business partnership. This was something much more complicated and dangerous. There were invoices for government contracts that did not seem real. There were bank transfers to accounts with names she did not recognize. There were emails discussing bribes and payments to government officials. There were references to money laundering and corruption schemes that involved millions of shillings. Kofi was not just having an affair with Victoria. He was involved in serious criminal activity. He was stealing money, breaking laws, and putting their entire family at risk. Amara took out her phone with hands that would not stop shaking. She photographed every single document. It took her hours. Her eyes burned from staring at the phone screen, and her legs ached from standing, but she did not stop. She photographed bank statements, contracts, emails, everything. When she was finished, she carefully put everything back exactly as she had found it, locked the office, and left the building. That night, sitting in her small rented room in Nairobi, Amara made phone calls. The first call was to her uncle Baba Juma, the retired judge who had raised her after her father died. She could hear the shock in his voice as she told him everything she had discovered. "Do not do anything alone, Amara," he said firmly. "This is very serious. You need a lawyer. A good one. Meet me tomorrow." The next day, Uncle Baba Juma took Amara to meet a lawyer named Doris Mwangi. Doris was a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a quick mind. She listened carefully as Amara explained everything: the forged signatures, the illegal loans, the involvement in corruption schemes. Amara showed her the photographs she had taken on her phone. Doris's expression grew darker as she reviewed the evidence. When Amara finished, Doris sat back in her chair and was quiet for a long moment. "Amara," Doris said finally, "what you have here is evidence of several serious crimes. Document forgery, fraud, illegal borrowing, money laundering, corruption. These are all criminal matters. Your husband has put himself and your family in a very dangerous situation. But I want you to understand something very important. You are not the criminal here. You are the victim. Can I stop him from selling the compound?" Amara asked desperately. "Yes," Doris said with confidence. "In Kenya, property that is part of a marriage is considered matrimonial property. Even if you are not the registered owner alone, you have legal rights as a spouse. You have contributed to the maintenance and improvement of that property for over 20 years. No sale can happen without your consent. Additionally, these forged documents are evidence of fraud. Any court would side with you." Over the following weeks, Amara and Doris built a case. They gathered documents, created a timeline of all the forged signatures and illegal loans. They collected evidence of Amara's contributions to the property, receipts from her agricultural income, testimony from neighbors about how she had maintained and improved the compound. They documented everything carefully and professionally. But Doris also told Amara something else. "Your husband will not want this exposed," she said. "The corruption, the money laundering, these things could destroy him. He could go to prison. This gives us power, Amara. This gives us leverage." Amara thought about this carefully. Then she made another decision. She asked Doris to help her find someone important. She wanted to find Senator Mwangi's first wife, Nyambura. She wanted to tell her the truth about her husband's affair and his involvement in this corruption scheme. Because Amara understood something that Kofi did not. Sometimes the most powerful weapon is the truth. Amara sent a message to Kofi on a Tuesday afternoon. She used simple words, speaking to him as if everything was normal, as if the world had not fallen apart. "We need to have a family meeting," she wrote. "The elders want to discuss important matters. Please come home this weekend." She did not tell him what the meeting was about. She did not tell him that she knew everything. She simply waited. The weekend arrived slowly. Amara spent the time preparing. She organized all her photographs and documents into a careful order. She met again with Doris, who coached her on what to say and how to say it. She also waited for news from Nyambura, Senator Mwangi's first wife. That news came on Thursday evening. Nyambura had contacted her, and they had spoken for over an hour on the phone. Nyambura's voice had been filled with pain and anger. She thanked Amara for warning her. She told Amara that she was now investigating her husband's activities and his relationship with Victoria. She also told Amara something very important. "I am going to destroy them both. Not because of me, but because what they are doing is wrong. They are stealing from our country. They are criminals. Thank you for giving me the truth, sister." On Friday evening, Kofi arrived at the compound. He looked confused when he saw that the sitting room was filled with people. There was Uncle Baba Juma, who sat with the dignity of a retired judge. There was Uncle Kamau, Amara's father's oldest brother, now 83 years old but still sharp-minded. There was Auntie Zainab, a respected woman from the village who had known Amara since childhood. There were 3 other male elders from the community, men who had known Kofi for many years. And there was Mama Grace sitting in the corner, her old hands folded in her lap, her eyes watching everything. Kofi's face showed surprise then irritation. "What is this?" he asked looking at Amara. "Why are all these people here? I thought we were having a family meeting." "We are," Amara said quietly. "This is family. And this is serious." Kofi tried to leave but Uncle Baba Juma stood up. "Please Kofi. Sit down. We need to talk to you about something very important." There was authority in Uncle Baba Juma's voice, the voice of a man who had spent 40 years in the courts of Kenya, the voice of a man who had seen many criminals and many liars. Kofi hesitated then sat down. He was still confused but something in the atmosphere of the room had changed. He could feel it. These were not people who had come to support him or to listen to his excuses. Amara stood up. Her hands were shaking but her voice was steady. "Kofi," she said, "I want to show you something." She had printed out copies of the documents. She had organized them carefully. She began to lay them out on the table in front of him. First came the loan agreements with the forged signatures. She pointed to each one. "This is my name," she said. "But I did not sign this. This is a forgery. You forged my signature. These loans are for 300,000 shillings, 500,000 shillings, 2 million shillings. All taken against our family's compound. All without my knowledge or permission. All illegal." Kofi's face went very pale. He stood up suddenly. "Amara, where did you?" "Sit down," Uncle Baba Juma said firmly. Kofi sat down. Amara continued. She showed the documents about Victoria. She showed the business contracts that did not make sense. She showed the bank transfers. She showed the invoices for government contracts that appeared to be fake. "Victoria Mwangi," Amara said, "is the wife of Senator David Mwangi. You are not having a business partnership with her, Kofi. You are involved in money laundering and corruption. You are stealing money. You are breaking the law. And you are going to use money from our family's home to do this." The room was completely silent. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Then Amara showed the last piece of evidence. She had a photograph of Victoria and Senator Mwangi together at a government event. She showed it to everyone in the room. "Senator Mwangi," Amara said, "does not know that his wife is having an affair with my husband. Senator Mwangi does not know about the corruption schemes. But he knows now. His wife, Nyambura, has told him everything. She is investigating. The police will be investigating. The corruption officials will be investigating." Kofi's face had turned almost gray. He opened his mouth but no words came out. "You put our family in danger," Amara continued, and now her voice was shaking with emotion. "You forged my name. You stole from our home. You broke the law. You planned to destroy our family's legacy for a woman who used you. For money that does not belong to you." Uncle Baba Juma spoke then, his voice serious and formal. "Kofi, what you have done is criminal. These are matters that could result in prison time. The forged signatures alone are a serious crime. The fraud is a serious crime. The involvement in corruption is a serious crime." "But," Uncle Baba Juma continued, and he looked at Amara then back at Kofi, "my niece has asked me to come here and give you a choice. A choice that you do not deserve but a choice nonetheless." Kofi stared at him, waiting. "You can sign an agreement," Uncle Baba Juma said. "An agreement that says you will provide financial support to your children for their education and their future. An agreement that says you will provide monthly support to this household. An agreement that says this compound belongs to Amara, and you will never attempt to sell it or borrow against it again. You will sign this agreement and you will keep your word." "Or?" Kofi asked weakly. "Or," Uncle Baba Juma said coldly, "Amara will go to the police with all of this evidence. She will report the forgery. She will report the fraud. She will report your involvement in corruption. And she will also make sure that Senator Mwangi knows that you were the one who introduced his wife to these criminal schemes. You will lose everything, Kofi. Your freedom, your reputation, your family. Everything." The elders all nodded in agreement. Mama Grace looked at her son-in-law with eyes filled with sadness and disappointment. Amara sat down and waited. She was not angry anymore. She was just tired. And she was waiting to see if the man she had married 23 years ago would finally do the right thing. Kofi sat in the chair, his head in his hands, and he began to cry. But these were not tears of sadness or remorse. These were tears of fear. He understood that his life as he had known it was over. "I will sign," he whispered. "I will sign the agreement." The morning after the family meeting, Amara walked into the office of the Nairobi Police Department with a folder containing all of her evidence. She was not afraid anymore. She had moved beyond fear into a place of quiet determination. A police officer named Inspector Karyuki listened to her story carefully, examining each document she presented. "This is very serious," Inspector Karyuki said, shaking his head. "Document forgery, fraud, illegal borrowing against property, these are all criminal matters. And if what you are telling me about the connection to Senator Mwangi's corruption schemes is true, this becomes even more serious." Amara filed an official complaint. She gave statements to the police. She provided copies of all the photographs and documents. Within days, the police opened an investigation into Kofi's activities. They also contacted the bank that had issued the fraudulent loans, asking them to investigate how the forged documents had been accepted. At the same time, Amara went to the land registry office with her lawyer Doris. They filed a formal notice stating that Amara was a co-owner of the family compound and that no sale or transfer of the property could take place without her written consent. They also filed a complaint about the illegal loans that had been taken against the property. The land registry office immediately flagged the property, preventing any sale. News of the investigation began to spread. In the city, Senator Mwangi received a visit from police officers. His wife Nyambura had given them evidence of the corruption schemes, the money laundering and the illegal business dealings. The senator's political career began to crumble. Newspapers started to report on the investigation. The headlines were shocking: government official under investigation for corruption, and multi-million shilling fraud scheme exposed. Victoria disappeared. Nobody knew where she went. Some people said she had fled the country. Others said she was hiding with relatives in another part of Kenya. Her bank accounts were frozen. The businesses she had created were shut down. The money that had been flowing through her schemes was traced back to government contracts that had never been completed, projects that had never been built, services that had never been provided. 1 week after the family meeting, police officers arrived at Kofi's office in Nairobi. They arrested him for document forgery and fraud. He was taken to the police station and questioned for many hours. When he was released on bail, he looked like a broken man. His face was gray, his eyes were empty, and his hands trembled. Kofi called Amara that evening. His voice was desperate, almost begging. "Please," he said, "please do not push this further. I will do anything. Just tell me what you want." "I want you to sign the agreement," Amara said simply. "The one that Doris prepared. The one that gives me the compound permanently, that requires you to pay for the children's education, that requires you to pay monthly support for the household. That is all I want." "I will sign," Kofi said immediately. "I will sign everything. Just please stop this." The agreement was prepared by Doris with great care and legal precision. It was a comprehensive document that protected Amara and her children completely. It stated that, first, the family compound belonged to Amara alone, and Kofi had no claim to it whatsoever. He could never attempt to sell it, borrow against it, or transfer it to anyone else. Second, Kofi would pay for all of the children's education, from primary school through university, if they chose to attend. Third, Kofi would provide a monthly payment of 50,000 shillings to support the household. This money would cover food, utilities, maintenance of the property, and other household expenses. Fourth, this agreement would remain in effect until the youngest child, Kamau, completed his education and turned 25 years old. Fifth, if Kofi failed to make these payments, he could face legal action and imprisonment. Sixth, Amara had the right to modify the agreement if circumstances changed, but only with the approval of the family elders and the lawyer. When Kofi came to sign the agreement, he did so without hesitation. His lawyer advised against it, warning him that he was agreeing to very harsh terms. But Kofi understood that he had no choice. The alternative was prison. The alternative was complete destruction. The alternative was losing everything. "I understand," Kofi said quietly to Doris as he signed each page. "I deserve this. I deserve worse." The police continued their investigation for 3 months. They interviewed witnesses, examined bank records, and traced the flow of illegal money. In the end, Kofi was formally charged with 3 counts of document forgery, 2 counts of fraud, and 1 count of illegal borrowing against property. He was sentenced to 2 years in prison, though the sentence was suspended on the condition that he make full restitution and comply with the agreement he had signed with Amara. Senator Mwangi faced more serious charges. He was investigated by the anti-corruption authorities. He was charged with accepting bribes, money laundering, and misuse of public office. His political career was destroyed. He was forced to resign from the Senate. Later he would face trial. Victoria was never found. It was discovered that she had used multiple false identities and had connections to international money laundering networks. Interpol became involved in the investigation. Her assets were frozen, and authorities in several countries began to investigate her activities. The scandal was reported in newspapers across Kenya. People discussed it in tea shops and markets. For a brief time, Kofi became known as the man who had forged his wife's signature to fund his affair with a corrupt politician's wife. His name was associated with shame and criminal activity. But in the village something different happened. Amara became known as a woman of strength and intelligence. She had not just protected her family. She had helped expose a corruption scheme that involved government officials and millions of shillings. She had used the law to fight for justice, not just for herself but for her entire country. Mama Grace recovered from the shock of the betrayal. She began to smile again. She held her grandchildren close and told them stories about their mother's bravery. Juma, who was 14, understood what his mother had done. He watched her carefully, seeing how she made decisions, how she gathered evidence, how she worked with lawyers and police officers. He decided that he wanted to become a lawyer to help people who had been wronged, just as his mother had been helped. Zuri, who was 11, saw her mother stand up to a powerful man and win. She learned that women could be strong, that women could fight for what was right, that women did not have to accept betrayal quietly. Little Kamau, who was only 8, did not fully understand what had happened, but he understood that his mother had saved their home. He understood that he would not have to leave the compound where he was born. 3 years later, when the prison term ended, Kofi was released. He moved to another city and started a small business. He made his payments to Amara faithfully without complaint. He saw his children only occasionally, and the relationships between them remained formal and distant. He had lost not just his freedom temporarily, but his family permanently. The compound remained Amara's. It became a symbol in the village, a symbol of justice, of a woman's right to protect her home and her family, of the power of truth and evidence. 5 years passed after Kofi's release from prison. The compound that had almost been lost stood solid and strong, exactly as it had been for generations. The red earth remained fertile, the stone walls remained firm, and the acacia tree continued to grow taller and stronger with each passing year. But the people who lived within these walls had changed. They had been tested by fire, and they had emerged not broken but transformed. Mama Grace lived to be 81 years old. In her final years, she spent most of her time sitting under the acacia tree, knitting sweaters and blankets for her grandchildren. Her hands, though wrinkled and spotted with age, still moved with purpose and love. She would tell anyone who visited the compound the story of how her daughter Amara had saved their home. She told it to neighbors, to relatives who came to visit, to the children who played in the yard. "My daughter," Mama Grace would say, her voice filled with pride, "is the strongest woman I have ever known. She faced a man who wanted to destroy everything we have built, and she defeated him with intelligence and courage. She did not cry and give up. She did not accept what seemed impossible. She fought. And she won." When Mama Grace passed away peacefully in her sleep one night, the entire village came to mourn her. They gathered at the compound to pay their respects. And in their words and their presence, they acknowledged that this home, this place, had been saved. It had been saved by a woman who refused to accept defeat. Amara remained in the compound with her children. Juma, who had watched his mother's strength and decided to become a lawyer, worked hard in school and eventually was accepted to study law at the University of Nairobi. He became a lawyer just as he had dreamed, and he specialized in family law and property rights. He often told people that his inspiration came from watching his mother fight for what was right. Zuri grew into a remarkable young woman. She was intelligent and determined, with her mother's quiet strength. She attended secondary school at the top of her class and later studied business at university. More importantly, she understood from a young age that women needed to be educated, needed to understand their rights, and needed to be independent. She made a promise to herself that she would never depend completely on any man for her survival or her dignity. Little Kamau grew up in the compound, surrounded by the love of his mother and the memory of his grandmother. He did not fully understand what had happened when he was 8 years old, but as he grew older, his mother and his siblings told him the story. They explained to him what justice meant, what courage meant, what it meant to stand up for what was right even when it was difficult and frightening. But the most important change came in Amara herself. After the legal battles were over, after Kofi had been sentenced and had served his time, after the scandal had faded from the newspaper headlines, Amara made a decision. She decided that her suffering would not be wasted. She decided that she would use her experience to help other women in her community who faced similar situations. She began to hold meetings in the village. She invited women to gather under the acacia tree or in the compound sitting room. She taught them about their legal rights. She told them that in Kenya women had the right to own property. She explained that marriage did not mean a woman had to sign away her rights. She showed them documents and examples of how to protect themselves. You do not have to accept betrayal, Amara would tell them. You do not have to accept abuse. You do not have to accept the loss of your home or your property. There are laws that protect you. There are people who will help you. You just have to be brave enough to ask. Many women came to listen. Some of them had stories similar to Amara's. Some of them had husbands who had taken loans against their property without their permission. Some of them had been threatened with losing their homes. Some of them had been abandoned with children to raise alone. Amara worked with Doris, the lawyer who had helped her, to create a simple guide in Swahili that explained women's property rights. They printed copies and distributed them throughout the village and in nearby towns. They held workshops where women learned how to document their contributions to property, how to protect their names legally, and how to seek help if they needed it. A local radio station heard about Amara's work and invited her to speak on their program. She talked about her experience, not with bitterness, but with the intention of helping others. She became known throughout the region as a woman who understood justice, who had lived through terrible betrayal and emerged stronger, who was now dedicated to helping other women protect themselves and their families. 10 years after the events that had nearly destroyed her family, Amara was invited to speak at a women's rights conference in Nairobi. She stood in front of hundreds of women and told her story. She spoke about the day her husband announced he was selling their home. She spoke about the fear, the confusion, the feeling that the world had ended. She spoke about discovering the forged documents, about the courage it took to confront him, about the power of evidence and truth. I am not special, Amara told the audience. I am an ordinary woman from a village. I had no education in law. I had no money to hire the best lawyers. I had no connections to powerful people. But I had something that was more valuable than all of those things. I had determination. I had the support of my family. I had the willingness to fight for what was right. And I had access to the law, which protected me. She paused and looked out at the faces in the audience, faces of women who had suffered, who had struggled, who had survived. You have these things too, she said. Every one of you has the right to protect your property, your home, your family. Every one of you has the right to dignity and respect. Every one of you has the right to justice. You just have to believe in yourselves enough to fight for it. Years later, Zuri would often return to the compound with her own children. She would stand under the acacia tree just as her mother had done, and she would tell her children the story of their grandmother, of how she had saved their home. Your grandmother was very brave, Zuri would say. She faced a man who had betrayed her, who had forged her name, who had tried to take away everything our family had built. And she defeated him. Not with anger or violence, but with intelligence and truth. This home that you see, this land that you play on, this is a monument to her strength. The compound became known throughout the region as the home of Amara, the woman who had fought for justice. People came to visit and to hear her story. Young lawyers came to learn from her about women's rights. Young women came to be inspired by her courage. Amara lived to be an old woman in the compound. She never remarried. She said that she had been married once and that was enough. Instead, she devoted herself to her children, her grandchildren, and to helping the women of her community understand their rights and their power. When people asked her if she regretted her marriage to Kofi, she would say, "No. If I had not married him, I would not have my children. And my children are my greatest joy. But I learned something very important from that marriage. I learned that a woman must never depend completely on a man for her survival. She must have her own strength, her own knowledge, her own rights. That is the only true security." The compound stood as a testament to her wisdom. It remained in the family, passed down to her children and then to her grandchildren. It was not a place of sorrow or betrayal, but a place of healing and strength. It was a place where a woman had stood firm and refused to be destroyed. It was a place where justice had prevailed, not in a courtroom or a police station, but in the hearts and minds of people who remembered that one woman's courage could change everything. And under the acacia tree, in the soft evening light of the Kenyan Valley, Amara's story was told again and again, passed down through generations, a reminder that strength comes not from power or money, but from the courage to stand up for what is right, and the determination to protect those you love.